Hi, welcome to Korrmotive. It's been a couple years since I've made a video on why a certain car failed. The last one I made was in 2022 about the Kia Stinger, and I managed to elicit some pretty intense reactions, especially from owners. Which is fine. That's healthy, discussion, communication, that sort of thing. But I think that today's car is a little more difficult to argue with in terms of it being a failure and a flop. Today we're going to explore the Suzuki Kizashi and why that car was a flop. So let's start with Suzuki itself. Suzuki, as of the recording of this voiceover, is celebrating its 115th anniversary, as it was founded in October of 1909. Suzuki these days is very well known for making affordable and oftentimes cutesy small cars that are designed to give you a lot for not a lot of money. Two cars that immediately come to mind when talking about this are the Jimny, which I've already driven a couple of years ago, and the Ignis. But a really long time ago, Suzuki also tried to tackle a little bit above its own station, and that happened with the Kizashi. The Kizashi was previewed by a couple of concept cars that came a few years before. The Kizashi 1 was a rather nice looking shooting brake sort of deal. The Kizashi 2 was like a crossover SUV, but the Kizashi 3 was the design that ended up being chosen for the production model. The concept, incidentally, had a 3.6-liter V6 engine under the hood. Not the case with the production Kizashi, which was released in Japan. It went on sale in Japan in 2009, and other foreign markets soon followed, including Europe. So, what is the Kizashi, in fact? Well, it's a mid-size sedan, as you can see by the photos on the screen. It's a mid-size sedan, so in Europe that means it competes with the Volkswagen Jetta, the Renault Laguna, sort of, and the Megane sedan, and the Ford Focus sedan, among a few others as well. The Honda Civic sedan comes to mind here, and a few others. And for the most part, it had a pretty good winning formula. Suzuki is well known for its reliability. The Kizashi, in my opinion, is a pretty attractive looking car, and it had a good amount of power, and it has completely won the hearts of journalists, from what I could see on the internet, for its driving dynamics. It was great fun to drive and also pretty practical and full of features. And also, it offered all-wheel drive, something that not a lot of its competitors offered at the time. The final Kizashi rolled off the production line in 2015, although in Europe it was actually discontinued after model year 2014, so only a few model years on the European market for the Kizashi. Now, it's important to mention that after this point, some automakers started discontinuing their mid-size sedans, like for example Volkswagen would eventually discontinue the Jetta because they already had the Skoda Octavia, but the market started to shrink after 2015 for mid-size sedans like the Kizashi. So that could be one of the reasons why the Kizashi was a flop, especially in Europe. But I, for one, think that there are a few other reasons why the Kizashi fell flat on its face when it came to sales in Europe. So let's start by analyzing each one of these components one by one. Now, as I said, the Kizashi was officially sold in Europe, and it competed with our favorite European mid-size sedans that were on sale at the time. So one of the reasons why I think this Kizashi flopped is because of the engine situation. In Europe, the Kizashi came with the same engine that it came with all over the world, a 2.4-liter 4-cylinder gasoline unit that also powered the Grand Vitara. And that was it. Nothing else. That was the only powertrain you could have on the Kizashi no matter where you were in the world. Yes, it had a solid 188 horsepower, but it was still a gasoline engine, and in Europe, if you're going to compete in this segment, especially in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, this is not the way to go. Every single one of the Kizashi's competitors offered some type of diesel engine. The Jetta obviously did, it's a Volkswagen product after all, but all of the other European competitors of the Kizashi also would sell you a diesel option, whereas the Kizashi, it was gasoline or nothing. Another issue with the Kizashi is the transmission situation. You could have either a 6-speed manual or a CVT, and that was it. Again, a little bit problematic when you consider that the mid-size car segment in Europe offered some type of conventional automatic for each one. And, people are not the biggest fans of CVT automatic transmissions. Most people who buy an automatic prefer gears. So as a result, the Kizashi was not able to win that many hearts due to the fact that you couldn't get it with a classic automatic transmission in case you didn't want a manual. Now, the part about the engine confuses me especially because during this time when the Kizashi launched in Europe, Suzuki actually had a pretty close relationship with Fiat, and a lot of Fiat's powertrains would go on to power vehicles in Suzuki's lineup. The one that immediately comes to mind is the Swift DDIS. The first and second generation Suzuki Swift, they're not the first and second generation, but these two Suzuki Swift models, because I forget that's difficult to keep up because of the various different nomenclatures in global markets, but anyway, these two Suzuki Swift generations in Europe were offered with a 1.3 liter turbo diesel engine from Fiat, just in case you wanted a diesel instead of the plentiful gasoline units that Suzuki could offer you. And, I'm confused why Suzuki didn't leverage this partnership with Fiat to give the Kizashi a diesel engine as well, because in 2009, Fiat was just coming out with their new 2-liter JTD diesel, which would go on to power various Fiat and Alfa Romeo models at the time. The 159 comes to mind here. In the facelift 159, the 2-liter JTD replaced the 1.9 JTD that came before. So I'm honestly confused why Suzuki just didn't tap Fiat for a diesel engine to put in the Kizashi to make it a little more appealing to European customers, because back in 2009, you got to remember, diesel was still a huge deal in Europe, and not everyone, but a lot of people were opting for diesel engines. And even if they did prefer gasoline units, and there are a lot of people that prefer gasoline units, I still think that a diesel option would have given the Kizashi a little bit more street cred. Another thing about the Kizashi that I think led to its failure was the brand image, the perceived brand image of Suzuki. You see, badge snobbery in Europe is still a major thing, and I seriously don't know why, because a lot of the stigma surrounding certain automotive brands has, in my experience, turned out to be completely unfounded. As I have more and more experience with press cars, I'm realizing that we shouldn't make fun of and judge cars based on the country of origin or the company that makes them. But that's just me. There are so many badge snobs in Europe, and I think that the perception that people had of the Kizashi was, oh, what's this? Suzuki, the cheap car makers, now make a mid-sized car? No way, man. We have so many other options for a mid-sized car from automakers that we actually trust. Why would we do that with Suzuki? Who cares? We got a Jetta, we got all this other stuff. We don't need a Suzuki in this segment. And I think that's also one of the reasons that led to the Kizashi's ultimate failure. Now, I do want to bring up marketing as well. I'm not exactly sure because, well, how do I say this? When the Kizashi first came out, I was 7 years old. So I'm not really sure how the marketing thing went. I know for a fact in Macedonia it wasn't really marketed all that much because I've only seen like 1 or 2 Kizashis around here. But I don't know how the global marketing strategy for the Kizashi really went because I was not old enough to understand that back then. But it could be one of the contributing factors. For those of you who were old enough to remember how the Kizashi was marketed in Europe or Australia, wherever you are in the world, let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear about that. One other reason why I think the Kizashi didn't do too well was the name. I think from what I've noticed as well that it's kind of difficult to market a car with a name that's not exactly easy to pronounce or that looks difficult to pronounce. So, for a lot of people, Skoda Octavia and Volkswagen Jetta and Renault Megane has a slightly different ring to it compared to Suzuki Kizashi, and I think it's, from a psychological standpoint, maybe they didn't want to have to explain what they drive and what a Suzuki Kizashi is. So I think the naming strategy on the Kizashi was also a little bit of a hit or miss situation. Because, for example, Suzuki Swift is much easier to understand and much easier to say than Kizashi. So definitely, in my opinion, the nomenclature might have had a little something to do with it as well. And again, there's the whole thing with the transmission. Every one of the Kizashi's competitors at the time offered an automatic transmission, a conventional automatic transmission, but the Kizashi only offered a CVT or a 6-speed manual. And CVT transmissions get a bad reputation, which is fine because automakers like Nissan show us why we should give them a bad reputation for the most part. But not having the option to choose a regular automatic, I think, drove a lot of people away. And this is all a huge shame because other than these issues, the Kizashi actually had a lot to offer. It was smooth, and according to journalists who have driven it, it was great fun to drive, but also comfortable. And in my opinion, it looks fantastic. I love the giant exhaust outlets on the back, and I love the big front grille and the alloy wheels that most of them had. It's a great looking car, but in Europe it's very difficult to be taken seriously when it comes to these sorts of segments that are dominated by European manufacturers. And the same applied to other markets, frankly. I mean, the Kizashi was also marketed in North America and Australia, and it from what I've seen, it didn't do too well over there either. So it's very unfortunate, and I think it's time we gave the Kizashi a little bit more love. If I am able to track down a Kizashi to film for a review, I will definitely be doing that. And that's going to be about it for this rambling video. Let me know, by the way, in the comments as well if you prefer this sort of rambling style, or you want me to script these specific videos like I did previously, or do you prefer the rambling style? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter. There will be a link in the description as always, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.